There's been quite a buzz recently, hasn't there?
Definitely.
Sparked by Nigerian President Bola Tinubu's state visit to Saint Lucia. It's really generated a lot of discussion, not just about the visit itself, but, its timing and what the real purpose might be. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the strategic thinking behind this high-profile diplomatic trip. We'll be digging into the core arguments from the official defense by the Nigerian presidency, and just as importantly, we'll explore the differing views and the pretty significant political debate it kicked off back home. You should walk away with a good grasp of what's truly going on.
Yeah, and what's so interesting here is that this isn't just, your standard head of state visit. It's actually a rich mix, weaving together history, foreign policy aims, and of course the tricky dynamics of domestic politics playing out internationally. We'll be looking at just how deep these connections go and why they feel so relevant right now.
Okay, let's get into it then. The presidency has been quite vocal defending President Tinubu's trip to Saint Lucia. What's the main argument they're putting forward? How are they tackling that initial skepticism?
Well, the official line is very clear. They're calling it a landmark diplomatic and cultural mission,
Yeah.
explicitly pushing back against any idea that it's, a vacation. The primary goals, as they've stated them, are first, to rekindle Nigeria's ancestral and strategic ties with Saint Lucia.
Rekindled, okay.
Exactly. And by doing that, strengthen bonds with the wider CARICOM bloc, that's the Caribbean community, 15 states focused on economic integration cooperation. The bigger picture goal is paving the way for what they call a new era of diplomatic, cultural, and economic possibilities.
Right.
And this whole thing, you see, is framed within two key policy ideas. First, South cooperation, basically, developing countries working together. And second, it's presented as a direct application of Nigeria's own 4Ds foreign policy strategy: democracy, development, diaspora, and demography.
The 4Ds. That's a strong framework. So when we talk about these 4Ds in action here, what specific connections are they actually highlighting between Nigeria and Saint Lucia?
Let's break them down because it's quite strategic. First, democracy. Saint Lucia is pointed out as a stable parliamentary democracy, which makes it a sort of natural ally for Nigeria, a country that's had remarkably, really 26 years of uninterrupted democratic governance. There was even apparently a St. Lucian commentator who described President Tinubu as a fighter for democracy when he arrived, so underlining that perceived alignment.
Okay, that's the D for democracy. What about development?
Right, development in strategic location. St. Lucia's importance here is, well, it's layered. It hosts the headquarters of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and crucially, it acts as a gateway to the 15 CARICOM member states.
A gateway.
And if you look at the economics, the combined GDP of those CARICOM states is over $130 billion.
Wow, $130 billion. That's significant.
It is. It's a very significant figure for potential South-South trade, for investment talks. And what's really insightful, I think, is how Nigeria seems to be strategically using these really deep historical ties. It's not just about culture. It's like a calculated foundation for boosting economic and political influence in a key regional bloc. This visit isn't just about remembering the past. It feels like reactivating an old network for today's geopolitical goals.
Interesting. And the other Ds, diaspora and demography.
Yes, diaspora and ancestral cultural links. This is where those historical threads really come alive. St. Lucia has deep roots connecting back to West Africa, especially Nigeria. Yeah. This is because of a wave of immigrants from present-day Nigeria back in the mid-19th century.
Mid-19th century, wow.
Yeah. And they brought cultural and religious practices that you can still see traces of today. This fits neatly with the African Union's 6th Region Agenda, which basically recognizes the African diaspora worldwide as a key development partner. So Nigeria's been actively promoting cultural exchange, education, culture, heritage stuff. And it's fascinating. Nigerian cultural exports like Afro beats, Nollywood films, literature, they're making a significant impact in St. Lucia and the Caribbean generally.
You see it everywhere now, don't you?
You really do. There's even this anecdote about the Gross Islet Street Party. It's a big weekly thing, held for over 50 years. Apparently, it was dominated by Afrobeats and Nigerian music even before Tinubu arrived. It just shows Nigeria's growing, soft power and cultural reach.
That's a great example. And the final D, demography.
Right, demography.
Yeah.
Nigeria is projected to become the world's 3rd most populous country by 2050.
3rd most populous, yeah.
And President Tinubu often highlights its young population as a major driver of economic transformation through education, industry, innovation. So the visit is also partly about leveraging that demographic potential in future partnerships, showing Nigeria as a source of dynamic, young talent.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of the 4Ds strategy. But, I mean, is it all just about Nigerian influence flowing outwards? Are there specific benefits that St. Lucia brings to Nigeria's strategy, things we haven't quite covered?
That's a really good point, and no, it's definitely not meant to be a one-way street. St. Lucia, even though it's small, offers Nigeria a stable democratic partner, and it has real influence within CARICOM and the Eastern Caribbean.
Right, the gateway idea again.
Exactly. Its strategic location is key for Nigeria to project its influence into a region with strong historical, cultural, and potentially economic ties, particularly for trade. It's about setting up a reliable sort of anchor point in the Caribbean.
Okay, now here's where, for me, it gets really interesting and honestly quite revealing. It's not just about these current policies. There are some amazing historical threads that really ground these ancestral bonds. I was genuinely surprised by some of these names.
Oh, absolutely. The historical links are incredibly deep and quite personal, too. Take Sir Darnley Alexander, a St. Lucian-born jurist who had a huge impact in Nigeria.
Chief Justice.
Chief Justice of Nigeria, yes, from 1975 to 1979. But his story in Nigeria started much earlier. He was actually recruited back in 1957 as a legal draftsman by the Western Regional Government under Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and he rose quickly, acting director of public prosecutions in 58, then Solicitor General and Permanent Secretary of the Western Regional Ministry of Justice in 1960.
Wow.
Then a judge in Lagos High Court in 64, Chief Judge of the Old Southeastern State in 69, and eventually he succeeded the great Sir Teslim Olawale Elias as Chief Justice. An incredible career.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
And it doesn't stop there. Another St. Lucian, Neville Skeet, helped design the Central Bank of Nigeria headquarters building.
Really?
Yes. And even Sir Darnley's son, Michael Alexander, served as a frontline medical officer during the Nigerian Civil War. So what these stories really show, I think, is that Nigeria's current diplomatic effort isn't just abstract policy talk. It's built on this foundation of, well, deeply personal, generational connections, shared professional lives that have quietly shaped both countries for decades. It adds a whole layer of sort of legitimacy and depth to the rekindling they're talking about today.
So these personal histories really bring home the depth of the connections, don't they? It's fascinating how the past is so clearly shaping the present. How do these deep ties, these personal links, actually show up in the agenda for President Tinubu's visit? What are the key events?
They absolutely do influence it. These connections are clearly being reinforced through the planned schedule. For example, President Tinubu is set to visit the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. The stated goal is specifically to deepen educational partnerships.
Yeah.
The delegation also includes members of the Nigerian Technical Aid Corps, that's TIT. They send Nigerian professionals out to other ACP countries, African, Caribbean, Pacific nations, to help with specific development needs.
Right, practical help.
Exactly. And St. Lucia's Prime Minister is hosting a reception specifically for the Nigerian community living there. That gives them a unique chance to interact directly with their president.
That sounds important.
And the historical weight of this visit, you just can't overstate it. St. Lucia became independent in 1979. In all that time, they've hosted fewer than 10 official state visits.
Fewer than 10? Really?
Yes, and the last visit by an African leader was President Nelson Mandela, way back in 1998.
Mandela.
So President Tinubu's 2025 visit, coming 27 years later, is genuinely a historic diplomatic milestone. It's a big deal. He's also scheduled to address a special joint session of St. Lucia's bicameral parliament. And that's happening at the Sandals Grande St. Lucian Conference Hall, which, interestingly, is named after former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Yeah. So yeah, this isn't just a routine stop. It's significant for St. Lucia, too.
Okay. But as you often see with these high-profile trips, especially one with such clear strategic aims, there was, well, a very different story making the rounds. It fueled quite a political debate back home in Nigeria.
That's right. The most prominent voice of criticism came from Peter Obi, who was the Labour Party's presidential candidate.
Yeah.
He pretty bluntly described the journey as a leisure outing.
Leisure outing. Okay, that sets a tone.
It certainly does. His main charge was that the president was essentially abandoning urgent problems at home. He specifically mentioned reports of severe flooding in Niger State. Reports claimed, tragically, over 200 lives and left scores missing. Now, Obi has consistently criticized the administration's direction and leadership, so this comment fits into his broader critique.
Understood. So how did the presidency respond to that specific criticism?
Oh, the presidency hit back hard. Through Frederick Nobufo, the senior special assistant on public engagement, he accused Obi of making misguided, mischievous, and uninformed comments. He dismissed it all as empty rhetoric devoid of substance.
Strong words.
Very strong. Gbagbo really doubled down, reiterating the visit is a deliberate foreign policy strategy meant to strengthen diplomatic and economic ties. She specifically highlighted Saint Lucia again as that critical gateway for Nigeria and the region. And he argued the visit actually reflects Nigeria's growing international relevance.
So, framing it as a sign of strength, not neglect.
Precisely. Gbagbo basically called Obi's comments an attempt to score political points with headline-grabbing performances. He argued President Tinubu's leadership is actually restoring confidence in Nigeria globally. He linked this to both effective domestic governance and strategic international diplomacy. He even issued a kind of warning, telling public figures to refrain from trivializing matters of national interest for political mileage, especially in moments that demand unity and seriousness.
Wow.
And he finished with quite a quote. The president's broad-minded and enlightened leadership at home is coloring the gray canvas of global disinterestedness. So yes, a very robust defense indeed.
That is quite the back and forth. What really stands out to you about this clash? How do these opposing views kind of shed light on the tricky nature of presidential travel, especially when it happens alongside domestic crises?
Well, what's striking, I think, is how this debate is just so deeply part of modern governance, isn't it? On one side, you have immediate, very real suffering, and an understandable public cry for the leader's attention on those domestic crises.
Right, the immediate need.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you've got the long-term strategic needs of foreign policy, building the nation's standing globally, securing future economic chances. The tough job for any leader is balancing these two critical and often competing pressures. The arguments from both Obi and the presidency really just highlight that constant tension between, immediate accountability at home and that long-term strategic vision abroad.
Absolutely. So we've definitely dug into the complex layers of President Tinubu's visit to Saint Lucia, from those strategic foreign policy goals rooted in history and economics, right through to the very robust political fight it sparked back in Nigeria. It's clear there's much more to it than just the headline suggested.
It really does underline why it's so crucial to look at multiple perspectives when you're trying to evaluate these kinds of, high-stakes events. You've got the immediate, pressing domestic worry, and then you have these longer-term strategic international goals. Both are valid points of view, and both need consideration. And maybe this raises a bigger question for all of us, how do we, as informed citizens, actually weigh those immediate domestic problems against the long-term strategic aims of a nation's foreign policy? Especially when those aims involve reconnecting with historical diaspora communities and trying to expand global influence. It's a tough balance.
Definitely something to think about as we all watch countries trying to find their place in this really complex, interconnected world.